If you can imagine the circle that you're normally inside and you feel kind of tight and constrained by all the conventions in our world, and people are incredibly tight right now with all the political correctness and stuff. They're so wound up. You get to go and you voyage up to the limit of that circle, you open the door and you peer through. Those are sublime experiences.
In interviews about your upcoming book, you've discussed encounters with the sublime. I'm curious if you could first start by defining sublime for me.
Well, the definition that I use in the book, because it's a word that has been used for centuries, has many different meanings. I mean, people say that a hamburger is sublime. I'm not talking in that sense. So I like to picture it like a circle, okay? So to be a human being, we all live inside of a circle, and that circle comprises all of the conventions, the codes, the beliefs, the ideas that are culturally acceptable at a time. Now, if you go back to ancient Egypt, those codes and conventions are different from now, but there was still a circle, because that's how humans operate. We try to create order out of the chaos of the universe, right? The sublime is everything that lies just outside of that circle. Things we're not supposed to necessarily experience, ideas that we're not supposed to necessarily have, behavior that's maybe a little bit transgressive or taboo, things that go beyond what we're supposed to think, do, and behave like. And so each chapter deals with something just outside that circle. The first chapter is about the cosmos and our relationship to infinity and eternity, which is a very strange idea that we're conscious of this. Then there's life itself and our relationship to the fact that of evolution and biology and how weird it is to even be alive and to be here talking to you. And then, I have ancient religion is one, childhood is another, because childhood was a very sublime moment in our lives. I have a chapter about the brain. Just being conscious of consciousness is already a sublime experience. Our relationship to animals. Love is a chapter, and how love can take us outside of our ego, which is something that's beyond that limit. So to just back up a second, the word sublime means, from the Latin, up to the threshold of a door. And the way I like to imagine it in my mind is, if you can imagine in each of those areas around the circle opening up, there's like a door opening up to something beyond what we're supposed to do or think. And you're peering through that door. And the ultimate door, which is the last chapter of the book, is death itself. Because that's the ultimate mystery. And some of us, in fact all of us, have had little inklings of what death is like. I myself had a near-death experience a few years ago. So if you can imagine the circle that you're normally inside and you feel kind of tight and constrained by all the conventions in our world, and people are incredibly tight right now with all the political correctness and stuff. They're so wound up. You get to go and you voyage up to the limit of that circle, you open the door and you peer through. Those are sublime experiences.
And can you speak to a moment maybe in early childhood that you may have had, or that most people may experience, that you could say is like a clear example of that sublime experience?
So you ask me about childhood. Well, in this book, I want people to get out of the idea that the sublime is some insanely incredible experience. It's actually around us in everyday life, right? Everyday life is actually sublime. We're just closed to it. We're just walking around asleep. We're sleepwalking. Okay? So childhood is sublime just by its very nature. And everybody had these experiences in childhood, but they've repressed them because the world was so fresh and new and everything looked different and exciting. So for me personally, it's not like some grand consciousness moment in childhood. It was more like everyday things. So I grew up in a neighborhood here in Los Angeles called Baldwin Hills, and we lived just on the side of this hill. And I can remember going up in this hill with my father, and there were these enormous power generators on the hill, and they seemed like kind of monsters to me, something out of science fiction. And just going up that hill was an experience of like something immense and vast. And then I remember at my elementary school, there was this really large parking lot. And so the images in my mind from childhood of Sublime are of these large, vast spaces, open spaces, which were like a childhood intimation of eternity, of infinity. And my father, who was very much into jets and planes, because he fixed airplanes during the war, he did build these little kind of rockets, and we would go to this immense parking lot, which is not immense at all because since I've been back there. As a child, it seemed immense. And we would launch this rocket into the sky, and I'd go, whoa. And then the same experience was flying kites, having a kite way up in the sky, give you that kind of thrill, that sense of infinity, which for a child children are very aware of it when they look at like the night sky. Something is endless. How can something be endless? And it gives you a kind of a chill and also a little bit of terror, because something that's endless is almost like death itself, sort of thing. So there are little moments of like encounters with space and large spaces and darkness that are embedded in my mind from my very early childhood of what I would call the sublime. I'm sure there are others, but those are what stand out right now.
You mentioned darkness as well. Can the dark moments of childhood and can that adversity that we experience in childhood also be considered sublime?
Well, I mean darkness in the sense of shadows and empty space, which are kind of a feeling of death, a sense of death itself. Like, I had a dream the other night. I guess it's almost like a nightmare, in which I dreamt that essentially the world had ended. And there was something where all of us are together, every human being on the planet, and suddenly there's a flash and everything goes dark and we all experience that darkness at once, right? That sense of just being blanketed in the dark is sublime and is terrifying at the same time. And I think my oldest childhood memory is I was with my oldest friend, a kid named Ricky Wise, but I don't know why I remember his name. And we were by ourselves, and we were walking around some old, apartment building, and in the shadows and the darkness, it's like my earliest childhood memory. I must have been 4 years old. But for some reason, the darkness of that, the shadow of this building stuck in my mind, because I think vast dark spaces have a very profound effect on the brain. As far as dark, bad experiences in life, there is a chapter on, which is my next chapter, which is called the dynamical sublime, which is part of the original philosophy that Immanuel Kant wrote about the sublime, which is the sense of, so the sublime originates in the feeling that we're so small as human beings, as a single individual in this vast cosmos. That's kind of the infinity aspect of it. We're so small, we're swallowed up in this endless time, endless space. The dynamical sublime are the moments where your willpower kicks in and you overcome such incredible odds that you're almost like godlike, and you have this feeling like, my willpower I'm not so small after all. And so overcoming tremendous odds can be sublime. I don't mean in the sense of, wow, I triumphed over it. It's the sense almost of your consciousness expanding and you don't feel so small anymore. I can't really call about my own childhood because I had a pretty easy, good childhood. I mean, my parents, I was pretty much unsupervised, but I didn't really have any horrible experiences. My near-death experience was probably the closest thing I've ever come to it, where I was unconscious for I don't know how long. I was sunk into that darkness that we're talking about in a kind of a coma, and it was sort of a sense of death.